Good morning and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Delaware State Capitol, a town known more for Dover Air Force Base, the Dover 500 racetrack, and traffic jams leading to the Delaware beaches, is a setting where higher education history is about to be made. On May 15th, a day that should have been filled with exuberance for seniors celebrating their big moment graduating from Wesley College in Dover, was instead bittersweet. All knew it would be the last time any graduate would walk across the stage as a Wesley Wolverine. Next year, the rising seniors will leave as Delaware State Hornets. The two colleges are located less than a mile apart and will become one on July 1st. Delaware State University, a 130-year-old land-grant historically black college and university, and proud owner of a successful Division I athletics program, is acquiring its neighbor to the east, Wesley College, a 148-year-old minority-serving institution with a robust Division III athletics program. My guest today is Dr. Scott Gines, Vice President and Director of Athletics at Delaware State University. Scott and I talk about the acquisition of one college by another and what that looks like in real life. We also talk about his experience working at two minority-serving institutions as a white man and his history of embracing diversity and equity at each. Well, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Karen. Good afternoon.
Glad to have you. And you are in a very unique situation on so many levels, but let's just start about this very first current situation. You are an outgoing or retiring vice president and athletic director at Delaware State University, which is an HBCU in Division I, but an HBCU in Division I who has just acquired another university, a Division III school, Wesley College. Can you tell us about how that came about?
Well, I can, and I'll attempt to do it succinctly. One, we're in the process of acquisition, and that process dates for nearly a year. And the lion's share of that work is really, as you might gather, done in the academic village. And it hinges very heavily upon accreditation standards, or the missions for why we exist in higher education. Wesley College is actually only a little over a mile away from Delaware State University's campus. We're obviously in a small state of 3 counties, and Dover is the capital city. Wesley College is right in the heart of the capital district, whether it's Legislative Hall, the Governor's Mansion, etc. Beautiful campus, beautiful opportunity. And they've been around for about 60 years as a 4-year institution, but much longer in the different types of institutions that they continued to grow and expand from. Very good Division III athletic department, in particular over the last 20 years, a great deal of Division III football success from that standpoint. Uniquely enough, one, this is an acquisition as opposed to a merger. Two, Wesley College and Delaware State, if we were to look at our demographics, whether it's in-state, out-of-state, whether that's racially, culturally, and even to some extent programmatically, we would find a long list of similarities that really share the premise and the business plan that expanding Delaware State, and I might add the only HBCU over the last 7 years in our country to actually demonstrate enrollment growth, to expand our presence, as well as our programmatic offerings. And that is how these very exciting and I believe transformative elements unfolded. This isn't a criticism, just a factual statement. Wesley College has declined in enrollment as a small private faith-based institution over the last 6 to 7 years, and they were looking for a partner. And I think we are the perfect and best and most transformative fit to make that purchase.
And for those of us who follow higher education, we know that this is going to become more commonplace as schools look to leverage their strengths and create partnerships that
Right.
allow them to grow. You see that with schools possibly merging with medical schools and other kinds of healthcare institutions to try to leverage the growth in jobs in healthcare. One of the things that I think my listeners would be interested in is I went on the website for Wesley and also for Delaware State to see what the transition would look like for athletes who maybe were currently playing at Wesley but might want to continue their career at Del State, but in a Division I program. So, how did you work those pieces out in terms of athletes moving on and maybe still playing for Delaware State?
Well, as I underscored, it is an acquisition. So just really to share the fundamental fact from an NCAA bylaw, and it really is only about one sentence, that one federal ID number, and you have to be an accredited institution. One federal ID number allows for one athletics department. So moving forward and potentially assimilating current Wesley College student athletes into some or all or part of our 19 programs here at Delaware State. That's really our two compliance directors coming together on what's really, for lack of a better term, a standardized checklist in terms of the processes. The subjective part is head coach selecting that young person in that transfer, whether that selection would be as a preferred walk-on, how that transpires is really a compliance function. And then, I began my career in Division I as a pure walk-on, if you will. And that worked out. I'm grateful that it did. And I imagine there will be several that will do that. The bigger part of it, from an enrollment management standpoint, has really been the overarching embrace, and as well as bringing into our communication systems all of Wesley students. Because as you can imagine now, and a little bit prior to now, pre-registration for fall courses, and how those things unfold, not specifically from an athletic standpoint, but the satisfactory progress that comes with making your selections and making progress towards your bachelor's degree.
Right. And how does it work in terms of coaches and administrative staff and that type of thing? I mean, are they automatically continued employment? Same thing with faculty. I mean, if you've got faculty, a lot of faculty who teach English, do they have to reapply for jobs as part of a new configuration? How does that work?
Well, that would take more time to probably explain than we have here. But that is a very real and important part of that process. As you know, an institution has to be liquid in terms of a business entity, even though we're nonprofits, if you will. So it's going to come back to that business plan, the projected amount of enrollees 1 year from now, as well as the programmatic piece. Wesley has very strong programs in the health sciences, and their campus will be a continuing hub for that here in the capital city, and as a part of Delaware State University. We have our strengths as well there too. And so in terms of the selections, there's a strategic and tactical element in terms of running to those strengths and running to those programs that really provide something for our state as a public institution that makes an impact here in the state of Delaware.
Yeah.
It does mean that, not all make the travel squad, if you will, in the process of this, whether it's a business acquisition or in this case, a higher ed acquisition. There are those difficult conversations that go with that.
No doubt. I guess the last question before we shift into another area of your expertise is what happens to the traditions? Do they just go away? Do they get incorporated into the new combined athletic programming, or do you just kind of just wait and see what happens?
No, I think the worst thing one could do is wait to see what happens, because I've had other experiences, not in acquisitions, but attempted mergers, and particularly in athletics, and I would say as well in terms of alumni and development as well. Those traditions, they're part of the heartbeat and the lifeblood of any institution. We've seen it probably in our lifespans when high schools merge, particularly the small towns where you've got three towns that in a different time period enjoyed great athletic success or a specific identity, and now they're merged into one. There's a hurt that goes with that. There's a void that goes with that. So being able to come together and honor those things, there's some obvious ones in athletics, your championships, your halls of fame, and bringing really two entities together.
Yeah.
To navigate and to partner and to shepherd that going forward, because making meaning there and making sure those legacies survive and thrive are very, very important.
Great point. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit now. You're one of the few people that I know who has worked at two consecutive minority serving institutions. One a Hispanic serving institution, and that was Texas A&M Kingsville.
Right.
And then currently you're positioned at Delaware State, which is an HBCU. That's allowed you a lot of on the ground intelligence about how these schools operate. What's interesting to me is Texas A&M Kingsville was larger, but it was Division II, than Delaware State, which is smaller, but Division I. And that brings some dynamics into what sports are really good, how successful your coaches are in each of those stratospheres. Talk to us a little bit about the overarching themes that you saw between one institution and another.
Right, that's, I think we could write a fascinating article or perhaps a dissertation on that. I think one of the things to begin with is just the geography. And, if we draw a line through the state of Texas, we're going to the east, we're going to find essentially the nation's HBCUs. That's not to say we're not going to find some HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions. We'll find some, but the majority of those are within and west of Texas. Texas is that state that has both of those types of minority serving institutions. When it comes to sport, I think we see some differences there. And we could look at high school sport in those two geographic areas, but let's look at conference championships within the Power Five. You've got 21 in the Big 12 and 23 in the SEC, whereas your ACC, Big 10, and Pac-12 are going to be 27, 28, 30. So the culture of sport, the racial demographics of your institution, where you're located geographically, those come together in terms of creating an ethos. And within that ethos, you also have to have a business plan. One of the exciting things about being at A&M Kingsville, and I had three different roles there, two of which were in athletics. But we started out with about 5,600 students, and about 6-7 years later, we had 93.
Wow.
One of the areas we grew exponentially was in our international students. And I'm probably one of the few athletic directors who's actually built a lighted cricket pitch. I was also
You might be the only one.
Well, that could be true too. But I was VP of Athletics and Recreation, and we saw an exponential growth to the tune of about 1,100 new students, particularly in engineering, from different parts of India, principally, coming for those particular programs. But both types of institutions have different reasons for meaning and how they were chartered. And I think one of the most important statements that I've really ever heard with respect to an HBCU comes from our current president, Dr. Tony Allen. And because some would look at enrollment within our country's 101 HBCUs today, and maybe even query and ask the question, well, why do you exist, or what's the relevance today? And his response to that, I think, is very powerful. He'll share with people, if you didn't have us, you would have to invent us. And so in terms of the leadership development, in terms of the cultural awareness and transformation, that is so key and critical. I was in Deep South Texas at a Hispanic serving institution in a part of our country that for a very long time was a part of Mexico. Mm. So the percolation and the just really the depth of embedded culture within that institution plays out differently from a historical perspective. Both have been very enriching to me and to my family because, yes, it not only took me out of comfort zones, but it exposed me to different cultures, perspectives, the depths of soul and gratitude. Both institutions graduate over 50% first-time college graduates. And and they both fall in the category of access and opportunity.
Yeah.
And those three words are very powerful. And it really, I believe, our higher education will and should more clearly emulate and become what HSIs and HBCUs are. And I believe those minority serving institutions will continue to rise. And I believe they'll have an increasingly impactful voice, not only in our country, but as it evolves in higher education.
Building on that, I've heard this idea resonate a couple of times in the last few months, mostly around names, images, and likenesses with athletes. But this idea of the athlete coming to an HBCU brings wealth in his own or her own brand and name and identity, and that they want to transfer that wealth, that identity that they bring to the HBCU, to the MSI, that allows them to enrich the experience around them. And this is in my opinion, in direct contradiction to the way many athletes have thought about going to college before, where they would want to go to a Power 5 school or some other kind of school that already had tremendous wealth, however you categorize it, whether it be in a fan base or in budget dollars, that type of thing. But they've realized they might do good or do better if they actually lift somebody up. And I've heard people talk about this about Howard. I've heard people talk about this about Norfolk State, where they feel like, you know what, maybe the best thing I can do with my life is to lift another program up. Have you run across that? Is that something you're familiar with?
Well, I've run across it primarily because you just mentioned two members of our primary conference in Howard University and Norfolk State University. The way I view that, and I think there's a beautiful purity to the contrast of those two perspectives, because to me, you painted that aspirational prospect in terms of perhaps selecting who is more Club Med in their amenities and perks and experiences, whether that's in terms of their current media rights, their current facilities, et cetera. Or in the two instances you just shared with respect to Howard and Norfolk State, to me, that's missional, that I want to make an impact.
Yeah.
And I want to I am driven to an institution based on its mission. And in full disclosure, I'm a graduate of a military college. That's very missional from that standpoint. An experience that's not designed for our enjoyment necessarily. We still call them adversarial types of education. Right. But I think the beauty of that is when you see highly rated prospective student athletes saying, I want to make a missional impact. And I think part of what we're losing in SCOTUS and NIL is the fact that we're homogenizing the overarching missions, particularly of our public institutions. We just got done discussing really the evolution of HBCUs and HSIs.
Yeah.
We don't want that mission to ever dissolve or dissipate. If anything, we want to lift that up higher. We're very brand conscious today, to the point where that word almost becomes trite because it's so frequent. But the missional element of that, I think, is very paramount, at least in this man's mind and heart.
Yeah, I just, it really struck me as also kind of a Gen Z kind of focus on, how can I make a better, have a bigger impact, and where can I have that biggest impact? And I think that the generation coming up through our high schools and club teams and that type of thing is thinking about those kinds of things. It's not just about putting the name of the school on the front of the chest, but it's more about what kind of an impact can I have in that program that'll benefit more people. And I just wonder if that's not a shift that's starting to happen with, minorities, but with minorities who are seeking out places to feel unique and to feel like they're really driving their own goals and visions. I don't know if you've seen any athletes like that on your campus, but I can't imagine you haven't.
No, I think that's very powerful. And, we mentioned the gender distribution. There's even a cultural difference there. Texas A&M Kingsville, we were about 46 to 48% female undergraduate. Not only here, but within the two Division I HBCU conferences, the SWAC and the MEAC, your undergraduate female enrollment is going to average about 61 to 63%.
Right.
In those two conferences. Previously, I mentioned Power Five. Your Power Five, in terms of female enrollment, is going to be about 51 to 54%. So there's about a 10 to 12% delta in differential between those. And that has some impact in terms of how you operate an athletic department in those spaces when it comes to gender equity in Title IX. Those are the decision-making eyes we're to look through. And the majority of sport law cases are going to boil down to issues of fairness or finances, and many times they coalesce. A close third is things that deal with liabilities.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that, unfortunately, way too much in the last year with schools, Division I mostly, dropping non-revenue sport programs to try to come into compliance with Title IX, that type of thing. But we've also seen an interesting trend at the Division III level of adding programs, and particularly adding men's sports, to try to address that gap that you talk about, because the men's and women's enrollment gap has gotten so wide on some campuses, they got to find a way to balance that out. You and I were talking earlier about the challenges that HBCUs have and other MSIs about trying to remain compliant with gender equity, which means you've got to, in some ways, have resources to be able to offer comparative opportunities for both genders. What kinds of thoughts do you have on making recommendations as to how the NCAA might be able to support that?
Well, one, I think some of the things we need to do in Division I in particular is we need to reevaluate the scholarship model in terms of program by program, and what are the scholarship caps. At the end of the day, that's really the only difference, pure structural difference, between Division I and II, and it's not always the case. Division I outdoor men's track and field, and Division II, that's the same amount of equivalency. So the delta between the differentials, we haven't we haven't even looked at that since 1991. So it's been 30 years. And we just got done discussing the changing demographics in terms of gender within different types and levels of institutions. And we need to revisit that. Secondly, the second and third largest distributions out of the NCAA annual pool, which, as we're both aware, comes from the majority of it comes from the men's basketball contract for March Madness. About 225 million of that comes out in two categories, and it comes out in grant and aids, and it comes out in sports sponsorship. If we look at the Power Five, only about 1 out of 5 are participation proportional. We're going to find a much shorter list, about 8% of them, that are proportional in terms of scholarship distribution based on their undergraduate enrollment, which is why I mentioned we've got to look at the governance of Title IX. NCAA doesn't govern that. That's a statute of our federal government. But I don't know why we're financially rewarding that in FBS programs, particularly, I mean, 225 out of roughly a $600 million distribution is a lot of money.
Yeah.
So can we not reshape this with different metrics? Grant and aid is 2/3 of what the broad-based distribution. The other third is sports sponsorship. We really haven't seen growth in women's sport programs within Division I.
Yeah.
So in our Supreme Court, we are deeply reflecting and deliberating on how we define amateur. But at the same time, for many years, we've been distributing really close to, 9 figures of distributions that's really rewarding a lack of movement towards how we become compliant. We can either be test 1 or test 3 compliant. We're either proportional or we've demonstrated we've covered everything.
Right.
And the other element of that is I do believe we need to incentivize that for those who achieve one of those 2 tests. And also, we've had matching grants in the NCAA for decades in terms of minority coaching positions and expansions in these very much needed and cultural and social justice ways. I think we need to look at our minority serving conferences. We need to incentivize adding more sport programs. Our current conference is 16 and the SWAC is 18. Contrast that to your Big Tens or Pac-12s. I'm not saying we need to have that many because as I shared geographically where you are and who you most frequently recruit from are going to play a role. But we need to increase those opportunities. There's only 3 sports within the NCAA Division I on an annual basis that typically average at or more than 25% African American student athlete participation, and that's track and field, basketball, and football. But within our minority serving conferences, we don't offer as many championships. We can be a change agent in this. It's uncomfortable leadership work. It will disrupt the business plans of some of the larger institutions. But at the end of the day, this was something we added to our country's, really our laws 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And we have to ask the question, it's a non-discriminatory statute. It says, so it's the only one that says it's okay to be not in compliance with as long as you're making progress. But how much progress is enough and how long does it take?
Exactly.
And I believe we need to take a forward role in that. Sorry for the long answer.
That's okay. I think it's a very thoughtful answer. I think that revisiting the role in adding diversity for our college-bound student athletes, whether they're first gen or a variety of other labels that we give them these days, that we've got to rethink what sports we offer. You mentioned cricket, and I just, while some people might say that's crazy, that's not even an American sport. It's a sport that attracts a certain population of students that would feel like they could successfully have as a co-curricular activity on campus. So therefore, they might be enrolled, retained, and graduated. Why do we limit our sport offering to a very narrow slice of the American population that mostly benefits white, middle, or upper income students? That's what we've always done. We may have to rethink this differently and see what sports do first gen students want to play. What sports can we afford to offer? Because we don't have all the resources that we once had, if we ever really did have them. But certainly our sports are getting more and more expensive. So how can we think differently about this?
Well, you're quite right, Karen. And even the comment, or if we did have, in the
Yeah.
last 15 years, the highest amount of Division I athletic departments that made as much or more than they spent is 25 out of 345. You and I wouldn't partner in a new business venture to get into a business with that low of percentage of success. But we do have to be thought leaders, and we do need to be courageous and confident in that. Your comments on cricket, I mean, I didn't pursue it as an intercollegiate sport. I mentioned I was also over campus recreation and fitness. How did I come by the notion? It was on my evening drive around our stadiums and fields, and I constantly saw our students playing cricket on the oddest of spaces, parking lots. What did it eventually unfold to become? I had 3 fee referendums, 1 in athletics and 2 in recreation. The one in recreation led to a 19-acre new construction where that cricket field is a part of it, but it also led to what's probably still the nation's best beach volleyball facility on any campus at any level. And they made me look good. That was a gender equity launch to become more proportional, but they are also the 2018 national champions. It also led to a new tennis center. So they helped advance athletics, and Texas pays legislatively based on weighted semester credit hours. The majority of our folks playing cricket were getting graduate degrees in the engineering sciences, and it paid a very high amount to our institution.
Absolutely.
So it is a complex business plan, but the answers are really, to me, all around us. And I think sometimes the greatest mistake we make in higher ed is we try and jam a technical solution into what's really an adaptive problem. And only adaptive solutions and adaptive leadership will solve those types of problems or dilemmas. And I believe a lot of the answers are around us in the NCAA. We're a bit reticent to change, however.
Boy, that is a weighted argument to end on, but it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, Scott, is because you are an adaptive leader. You've adapted throughout the entire career that I've known you, and you've been able to make each place you've been at better. So I really want to congratulate you on a successful athletics director career. Tell our audience what's next. What's in the hopper for Scott Gines going forward?
Well, thank you, Karen, for your kind words. And I'll share what I wrote. Because we're in a virtual environment here. As I let my entire staff know, I said I'm homeward bound for my final college town, and that is Tallahassee, Florida. In Tallahassee, our son and his family and our 4 granddaughters live, and we have a special needs adult daughter, Kelly, who now resides there as well. In terms of what I busy myself with, what new mission, I I embrace, I'm not quite sure yet. I'm not quite sure. One of the things I shared with my wife, Ginger, and you and I share this, you and I were both very young head coaches. And I was 25. You were a national champion early in your career. And from there, I'm a multi-time Division I head coach and 5-time AD, twice vice president. Sometimes those rebuilding jobs can wear us out a little bit where the buck stops there. I would share, though, I don't think we would, the Alston case would exist based on the salaries you and I probably received in our first head coaching jobs. Mine was 13.7, so.
Mine was 12, and I was the head coach at 2 sports.
There you go. So my times have changed, but it's hard to believe that it's been close to 40 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of life lived, thousands of competitions, a lot of games coached, a lot of camp sessions run, and 7 institutions. So it's been good.
That's great. That's great. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining the podcast today, letting us think a little bit about how it could look if we were just be willing to adapt. That seems to be the word of the podcast. Let's be adaptive.
Yes, I embrace that. We don't want a brotherhood of them and us or a sisterhood of them and us. We need to adapt and embrace.
That sounds great.